Shalom, here we are in Jerusalem with Father Kevin Cable, who is a Jewish believer and priest of the Anglican Church. So can you give us some insight? I know we've seen some people share the gospel in some ways maybe that are not very helpful.
I'll give you probably for me, the clearest example of what not to do when you come to Israel. So Shabbat starts on Friday evening, and you'll see many religious Jews around the Jaffa Gate area. And you will also often see missionaries standing there, and they are shouting out essentially kind of, repent and you need to accept your Messiah. Secondly, they're using a megaphone or a microphone. Now, that has issues for religious Jews because they're using electrical equipment on Shabbat. If you've got anyone watching who's been to the Western Wall on Shabbat, they'll know that there's signs up everywhere, turn your mobile phone off, turn electrical devices off. So firstly, you're offending these religious Jews walking by because you're using electronic equipment. And secondly, actually, most of these people are going to pray or spend time with family. And, if they've got their children with them and someone's shouting out, repent or meet thy doom kind of thing, probably not the best approach to engage them in conversation.
So can you share with us some of the complexities of sharing the gospel here, being a priest?
So I think in Israel, there are recognized Christian churches, which would include the Anglican Church, the Catholics, the Lutherans, the Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, the Armenian Church. And actually, they've been here well before the creation of the State of Israel. We're recognized by the State of Israel. We're free to minister, contrary to what some people may read in the press around the world. In Israel, we have complete freedom to minister. And actually, we have complete freedom to share the gospel and what we believe. But to answer your question about the complexities of that, you just need to be open and honest with people. Now, the way that we talk about our faith with people here is we call it a ministry of presence. So I will walk around, I know you can't see it because of my long beard, but with my clergy collar on, or in Jaffa, I normally walk around in my priest's robes. In Jerusalem, you'll see priests everywhere in the old city. You won't in Jaffa, and you won't in Tel Aviv. So immediately people will stop. And wow, are you a priest in Jaffa? And you just get talking with them. Oh, so what do you believe, kind of thing. And the same goes for our church and worship services. People come in, and if they want to ask questions, they can. And there is no problem with that in Israel at all. In engaging and people asking questions about what you believe. Now, when you start to get the other kind of side of that, where you being an active evangelist, then that becomes much more problematic, because this is when you will start to see people react. This is where you will start to see some of the anti-missionary organizations. Then they will start to pay attention to churches or groups that are doing that. It's complex because you have to be open about who you are. There are specific pieces of legislation in place about proselytizing. So minors are totally off limits, unless you have the written consent of their parents. And you also can't be seen to do anything that is providing a bribe, if you like, or some sort of benefit for someone becoming a believer in Yeshua, or even listening to your conversation about him. So, for example, that would include if I gave you a New Testament, you have materially benefited from that because you now own a New Testament. Well, technically speaking, you could argue that's a breach of the proselytizing laws. It's actually one of the reasons that if you go around Jerusalem sometimes, you'll see tracts about Christianity on bus seats. And everyone knows this goes on, because I can't give you something, but a person could leave a tract on a bus seat, And then if someone happens to sit there and pick it up and read about Yeshua, well, they've not been given anything. Now, that's not something we do, but the kind of anti-missionary response to that is they've now produced their own tracts, which they leave on top of the tract that you've left.
Oh.
So it kind of, yeah, so it can get very complex. I mean, for me, many Israelis I've met over the last 3 years, they're happy to engage and to talk about faith.
Mm-hmm.
If you're getting pushy, however, and if you're trying to actively target people, you're just going to find closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, you will find in the community very rapidly, this is just my experience, that from what we've seen, is that people who are very active in evangelism can end up in all kinds of complex situations. Now, there are organizations here in Israel that do that, and don't hear me be critical of that if that's the ministry that God's called them to. But our ministry is a ministry of presence and engagement. We
Mm-hmm.
talk with people,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we talk about faith, and that's much more open. And certainly we've found people are much more receptive to that. But it's not like the US or Canada or Europe or the UK.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even to the extent of what you're putting on your posters outside the church, because it's not just Jews who live here. You've got Muslims that live here, Druze, people of other faiths, and depending on where you are in Israel, those posters can cause extreme reactions if you're not careful. And you know, I'm aware of people who have put up posters about Jesus, for example, in predominantly Muslim neighborhoods, and there's been real trouble. Police have had to be called, and all kinds of problems. So I would say you need to get to know the place that you're living in Israel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I've heard that Israel is one of the least reached places with the gospel. Do you think that's true?
I think it's partly true. I'll tell you why. Because if you've made Aliyah and you've moved from the West or a country that maybe had a predominantly Christian background in the past, then more often than not, for example, if I'm a Jew from the US, I know what Christmas is. I know who Santa Claus is. I know that's nothing to do with the scriptures, but I know who Santa Claus is. I know what a Christmas tree is. I know what a nativity scene is. I know who Jesus is. I
Do you know that he's a Jewish believer, maybe?
Well, I don't know. It depends
not a believer,
on where you've.
Jewish person.
I think most Jews from outside of Israel would know that Christians believe that Jesus is the Messiah. A lot of them would also know, yeah, that he's Jewish. I think the days of like me, they think he's a Catholic or something like that. Certainly, most people I've met over the years, they know he's a Jewish man.
Mm.
So
it's probably it's kind of evolved now to the next generation who kind of knows that.
If you've moved here from the US or the West, then you will understand a little bit about Christianity. Not much, maybe, but you'll understand some.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're born here and your family has no kind of background in a country that has a Christian heritage or culture, then more and more often you will find that there's very little knowledge of what Christianity actually says and believes. I mean, I had a friend here, an Israeli friend, born and bred, I think second or third generation in Israel. And we were talking in Hebrew one day, and I was asking her to help me with pronunciation of some texts, and we came across the Lord's Prayer. And she read that and said, wow, these words are so beautiful. What is this? I said, well, it's the Lord's Prayer. Now, if I said that in England, the Lord's Prayer, even if you're not a Christian, most people know what the Lord's Prayer is.
Mm-hmm.
No idea. And Jesus said this? And she was absolutely, amazed that these were the words of Jesus. So it shows you that we cannot assume that people will have a knowledge of Jesus in Israel.